Assassin's Creed Mirage is an emotionally gripping, story-heavy game that offers an interesting historical take on the early Islamic caliphate of the Abbasids, as well as life within Baghdad. But how accurate of a story is this game really telling in regard to the actual history of Islam? In George Ainsworth's book, Helping Christians Understand Islam, the political and textual foundations of Islam are tested. The book addresses not only the troubling statistics behind Islamic scripture, but also the Islamic slave trade and how the treatment and status of women can be objectively assessed within Islamic text. While Assassin's Creed Mirage ultimately focuses on one character, Basim ibn Ishaq, the backdrop of historical events during the game does not necessarily convey the full story of Islam. Let's find out why.
How are you feeling? Ready to make the leap?
And just a quick heads up, I did my best to avoid any spoilers, so you won't need to worry about that. While Assassin's Creed Mirage doesn't expand much on Islamic scripture, we know that most of Islam's sacred texts are deeply concerned with political questions. Whereas only about 5.6% of the Old Testament concerns political violence, the Quran contains around 31%, and the Sirah, Muhammad's biography, contains about 67%. Part of this political violence within Islamic scripture stems from the concept of jihad. Jihad is the violent but sacred striving for Allah, the word itself meaning struggle. It is the struggle on behalf of Allah against all who resist. Now, to be fair, Muslims who don't participate in violent acts often donate to zakat, or Islamic charity. However, these charities are frequently chosen in such a way that they may indirectly endorse violent causes. Historically, this can be seen as many early Muslims raided caravans, took Jewish prisoners, and enslaved them in the process of creating dhimmi, non-Muslims subjugated under Islamic rule. In the game, a historical slave rebellion known as the Zanj rebellion can be observed. This took place from 869 AD to 883 AD. Dhimmi, jihad, and zakat aren't the only questionable elements tied to Islamic scripture either. Taqiyya is the practice of deception for Allah, as it is not considered a sin so long as it serves the cause of Islam, since Allah himself is referred to as a deceiver. Surah 354.
Left Baghdad in a hurry.
Secondly, we want to take a look at Islam and its founders' long history of slavery. As mentioned earlier, Assassin's Creed Mirage briefly touches on this subject with the Zanj Rebellion, which involved the uprising of Bantu-speaking people who had been forcibly taken from their homes in Southeast Africa to work as slaves on plantations in what is now southern Iraq. The working and living conditions for the Zanj were miserable, and they were treated harshly by their masters. It's worth noting that Muslims have around 40 different Arabic terms for slaves, reflecting their long and varied history of enslavement. Muhammad himself owned black slaves, according to both the Sirah and Hadith. His first wife, Khadijah, also owned slaves, and Muhammad would even give slaves away as gifts. While some argue that slavery was common practice at that time, it's important to recognize that Muslims continued to sell African slaves for roughly 9 centuries after Muhammad's death. As an example of this tragic legacy, Ainsworth's book references the modern story of Francis Bach, a Sudanese Christian enslaved in the late 20th century.
This fight will continue.
Lastly, let's examine the status and treatment of women within Islam, both scripturally and statistically in the modern era. Despite the video game's effort to diversify and allow players to choose between a strong, independent male or female character, such freedom and equality would have been unlikely for women living in an Islamic-controlled society in the late 800s AD. Addressing scripture directly, of the 12,066 words in the Quran referring to women, only 5.3% speak highly of them, mainly in the context of motherhood. Around 23% assign women an equal status, but always in the context of Judgment Day, while a striking 71% assign women a lower status than men. Muhammad himself commented that he had seen hell, and it was mostly filled with women for disobeying their husbands. Surah 434 even permits men to beat their wives. Unfortunately, this sentiment carries over into modern Islamic societies. In 2002, researchers at refugee camps in Afghanistan and Pakistan found that half of the girls were married by age 13. Furthermore, the Pakistan Institute of Medical Science reported that 90% of Pakistani women claimed they had been beaten by their husbands.
Basim, we should keep moving.
In conclusion, Assassin's Creed Mirage provides a rich setting for a cutthroat storyline about a strong-willed assassin seeking revenge. However, when considering the truths of Islam, scripture, and history, we must ask why, despite the game's historical inaccuracies, the violence remains so consistent. Islam's troubled past, questionable scriptures, and treatment of women both historically and scripturally bring us to this moral crossroads. If nothing else, Islam stands in direct contrast to Christianity. Knowing these facts helps us understand, at least on a moral level, where the two religions stand. While these points don't necessarily disprove Islam, the moral implications should stir something within you. And this is only a small portion of the broader, objective problems within Islamic teaching.